Hey there, Banditos. Welcome to another episode of the Dollar Bin Bandits. I'm Mike Farah, and today we have a unique episode for you. It is about two titans of animation. Their names are Eric and Julia Lewald. And why are they titans of animation? Because they helped kick off and continue and write for the X-Men animated series, the original. I know you are all scrambling, or you've already watched the season finale of X-Men 97 today, which we are all in for, all up on the bandwagon for that one. I think it's been a spectacular series. And we go back in time to look at the original series, which really set the bar very high for superhero animation at the time. That one and Batman the Animated Series sort of neck and neck for just really elevating the form. So let's stop wasting time and let's get to it. This is Eric and Julia Lewald. Guys,
Hello,
thanks for joining
hi.
us.
Oh,
Hi, Mike. Thanks for having
thanks for
us.
having us on.
We're thrilled to have you and talk all things X-Men the Animated Series. To get us started, so we usually ask as our first question, how did you first discover comic books? But I'd like to know from you two, how did you first discover animation, or what were the first, cartoons that you saw that really struck your interest?
Being a little bit older than the folks who might now be watching X-Men 97, having had the chance to write for it 30 years ago, as a kid, it was all the Warner Brothers, the Saturday morning stuff at that time. Not so much the sophistication then, but Rocky and Bullwinkle. Oh my God, Johnny Quest, all those great cartoons. And I got into the writing of animation kind of by default. I came out to California from Texas, determined to break into Hollywood somehow, and it took me 10 years, but an opportunity presented itself in animation, and that's how I got writing for animation at the Disney Afternoon for Chip 'n Dale's Rescue Rangers. And climbed in, hung on, and here we are.
Yeah, she stole all my shows. As far as the cartoons went, I used to watch Bullwinkle every Sunday morning with my dad. Instead of church, we'd watch an hour of that, and yeah, and the Warner's cartoons. Wasn't a big Disney fan. I liked the more scandalous kind of stuff, like Mad Magazine kind of humor in the '60s. So those two things, those two irreverent shows. And she mentioned Johnny Quest. There was only one season in 1964, but they replayed it and replayed it and replayed it. And if you look at the X-Men opening, Larry Houston and I talked about that before he drew the openings. They go, what's going to be? And we didn't want to do a narration or a voiceover, or a little sing-song jingle or something. We wanted to be, action, and the one personal reference for the two of us, by Larry was the producer director, the head on the art side, was Johnny Quest, and so that certainly informed our action sensibilities to leading into X-Men.
Very cool. So with that as a touchstone, how did you guys move from sort of an interest in animation, those early formative experiences, to a career in animation? I'm sure it might have been different for each of you.
Go ahead.
Just wanting to be a writer in Hollywood. That was the goal. And that was a goal before I knew it could be a goal. And then coming out, and again, not kidding, 10 years of trying to crack through, trying to make an impression. And this was in the 1980s, when there was no internet, there was no immediate way to sort of reach out or find people. It took that length of time to keep writing spec scripts, to keep trying to meet up with people, to write sketches, to make introductions, to finally getting an opportunity and if it had been a live action opportunity that had presented itself, I would have leapt on that. But writing anything for anybody and getting paid was magic.
Yeah, same thing. I was in Tennessee, and my friends and I loved movies, and programmed the movies for our college, and for about 4 years, and just dreamed of Hollywood. Made a couple incredibly low budget films before I came out here. And so coming out here is just, again, it's very strange to try to explain to people what it coming out to Hollywood when you don't know anybody. It's like, hitchhiking to Detroit because you want to, design cars. You can end up in Detroit, but it doesn't mean that anyone is going to ever let you anywhere near an office where you might figure out how do I pitch myself to be part of all this. And it was, I think, as Julie said, there's much more information on the web now. How ways to get in, film schools, what places to pitch or ways to pitch. But it's still, it's a very odd place where for every job, there are 100 people, competent people pitching to want to be part of it because it looks so fun and it's exciting and it's what you grow up with and it's like trying to be in the music business in Nashville. There are 100,000 people with a song in their briefcase going around trying to get someone to record it. It's a very odd business to be in. We have grown children now that we never encouraged to be part of our business, even though we've had a wonderful, comfortable, happy, productive, we just know how odd it is and how incredibly lucky we were to get it. Again, I did in my late 20s and I'd worked on some independent films and saved 5 cents from that. And my neighbor was working in Hanna-Barbera and he just said, oh, they just doubled their order for scripts. I see you've got a stack of them there. Are you interested in pitching? Never occurred to me to write for animation. And that was it was the foot in the door. His boss read 5 pages of something I'd written. She liked it enough to say, you guys can come in and pitch now. So from then on, for about 15 years straight, I don't think there was a week I wasn't working on some animation project. And so it was just like the door blew open. And it was great. But as with Julia, there was 10 years of writing and pitching and fighting and wondering how to get into this business that led up to that one day opening at Hanna-Barbera that I was able to take advantage of.
That rings very similar to what we hear from the comic book veterans as well. Different location, mostly New York, where the companies were, but certainly, a lot of scrapping around, trying to get samples in front of people, and then, you get that big break and suddenly you're there.
Yeah.
So that's great. That rings very true to a lot of the other folks we talk to. So let's get into X-Men specifically. What was your experience with X-Men, if any, before developing the animated series?
Is this going to get us kicked off?
No,
I'm clean here.
No,
you can have no experience.
Yeah, they all know. It was 0. I mean, if we got a couple books that we've written about the experience. One's called Previously on X-Men, which is an oral history of it with lots of interviews with people that wrote for it, that were voices on it, that were executives on it, artists on it, and another one that's about the art of it. And in the first one, I talk about getting started on this, and the X-Men, the animated series, in effect, was greenlit Monday morning, February 17th, 1992. And the Sunday night before, at about 9 or 10 o'clock in the evening, I got a call from a person I've worked with before, the guy at Fox named Sidney Iwander, who'd been my boss on Beetlejuice the year before.
Eric had been the story
I've
editor.
been the showrunner on that for a year. And
it was on Fox Kids.
Now on Fox Kids. So obviously I knew this guy well, and I worked with him in other places. And he said, we were talking about you doing another show for Fox, but that's not what we're doing. That was just a cover. We want you to develop and run the X-Men show. And I said, that's a Marvel book, right? And literally said that line because I'd seen the covers, and I'd read Spider-Man, Fantastic Four. I'd read some books growing up, but as I say, I was more of a Mad Magazine person than I was into comics. I really wasn't that heavily into comics as a kid, and so it was it was a shock, and I had zero experience. And he just said, we're meeting with 30 people tomorrow at Saban Entertainment, and Stan Lee and all the people from Marvel will be there. Just smile and nod and keep your mouth shut, and we'll get you through this. And once you've got it developed, everybody will be happy, and we'll go forward. And that's what happened. But yeah, zero. I knew nothing. On the art side, the people all were, X-Men scholars. I mean, had memorized, all 30 years of the comics. But I had never held an X-Men comic before I had to develop the television show. And
I was there when he got the call, and I didn't know who the X-Men were either. And that's something else to remember. 1992. There was no internet. There was no way to Google this. There was no 24-hour availability of anything at that time. And it was a real steep, real quick learning curve. But I want to sort of set the stage that this was for Fox Kids, which was a brand new network that was trying to, along with Fox, that was trying to break into the big three, ABC, CBS, NBC. And Fox Kids smartly had installed as president of Fox Kids a woman named Margaret Lesh. And Margaret Lesh deserves all the credit for all of this, because she was willing to push things to the limit. She was willing to make different kind of choices for what then would be a Saturday morning kids show.
Mhm.
And X-Men was one of her first orders of business. She had come from the work of, she'd worked at Marvel Productions for 10 years, was very close to Stan Lee, and Marvel Productions was doing a great job producing shows for other companies.
But NBC, ABC, and CBS just thought Marvel properties were terrible and no kid would watch them. So she'd spent the last 7 or 8 years working for Marvel, not being able to place Marvel properties. She'd placed like Henson properties or Transformers or Muppet Babies, whatever. She had a long list, 20 years of successful shows that she'd gotten on the air, but not Marvel stuff. And so when she got this job at this new little fledgling network that had maybe 8% of the US audience, 7 or 8% compared to the 92% of the three big ones, she said, I'm going to take a big risk and I'm going to push this thing. And her bosses didn't even believe in it. They said, lady, you're crazy. This is dark, adult, weird, intense stuff. And, kids aren't going to, eat cereal and buy our, our whatever our advertiser is going to advertise around this. This is a non-starter. And she said, I believe in this more than any other property out there. Give me this chance. And she made it happen. She picked the creative team. She picked the artists. She picked me. And so it was. She picked the production company that did the pre-production here, that did all the artwork and prep work to send overseas for animation, was a former colleague of hers. So she put the team in place, and the end result is her doing.
To put a exclamation point at the end of that too, when she said to her bosses, I want to make an X-Men series, her boss said to her, had no faith in it, said, okay, you get 13 episodes. That's it. When this crashes and burns, you're out of here. You understand? It's your job.
She said, cool.
Okay.
And
she took that risk.
We all worked on the first 13, spent about 7, 8 months getting it all done, which is, no time. These days, the new show they're doing, they did have like 3 years to work on, not to be bitter or envious, but
no, not at all.
Not at all. But so we hit August or so, July, August
of 92.
Of 92, and the show's overseas in animation because it takes 4 months to hand paint these things.
God.
And all the writers and artists are let go because the show's not going to premiere till January because it's taken so long. It's such an ambitious show from a production side. And so they're not going to keep us on salary for 4 months, waiting to see if this thing is successful or not.
Because the higher-up bosses assumed it wouldn't be
So
successful.
then it's a big hit in January, and suddenly, we're all getting these phone calls because we've gone off to work on other shows.
Right.
Because we're not, we've got mortgages to pay and whatever. And you got come back, and about 3/4 of the people were able to come back, 2/3 maybe. But we lost some people just because they didn't have the money to maintain a staff because they didn't think there was going to be a second season.
Wow. Well, there's a lot to unpack there. I'm gonna rewind a little bit because it's a fascinating story. So at the very beginning, so you get this call that you are I guess essentially trying out to be I guess a showrunner on this new X-Men series. So you said you were starting at zero. What was that prep like when you went out and said, "Oh, I need to find out about these characters, pronto"?
Yeah.
Did you just run out to a comic book store and buy all you could,
Well,
or how did you do that?
that was part of it. I mean, I was warned. I had really good people advising me. I was warned by Larry Houston, and Will Mineo. Will was kind of the head guy supervising everything. Will and Larry had worked together forever.
And they came from Marvel
And
Productions.
they
They were
both were
working there.
Marvel savvy. They Will had even how I learned about the X-Men starting from
Yes,
zero.
yes.
So Larry helped a great deal. Larry, knew this stuff backwards and forwards.
Just as a fan.
And there were couple Marvel reference books. Marvel Universe 1988 was one. He Xeroxed that for me and sent it over to me in a package and said, here are the 15, 20 characters we're going to pull our 7 or 8 characters from. Here's their world. Here's short lists of kind of the relationships and their powers and what they've all been through, and that was very helpful. So it was like a research project. I had this reference material. Bob Harris was there at Marvel, who's in charge of the books, and he would answer questions again by fax. This is pre-email
Because Bob Harris was in New York.
Oh yeah,
which is where Marvel Comics
right
was located.
So I sat down, and my head writer at the time, Mark Edens, who I'd known since college, he also knew nothing about the X-Men.
Oh.
So we just sat down, okay, well, here are the characters, because in the first couple of days, we and Marvel and Fox decided on who the main 8 would be. And that was, that's too many as it is, but everybody had ideas who they wanted. So that's what we started. So we sat down at our dining room table, because we didn't have offices, and laid out the first 13 episodes. And we just picked bits and pieces and say, okay, what kind of story could we make up about Rogue that would show her character most strongly to the audience? And so, okay, what if she can't touch anybody? It hurts her so much she might decide, I'll give up my mutancy if an offer were made. And so it's called The Cure. So that was the way, a story like that would come out. The opening pilot was kind of handed to us by Will Mineo, who had wanted to do that pilot. We needed a young character to come into the X-Men to be the eyes and ears of the audience, because believe it or not, at the time, 85%, 90% of America didn't know who the X-Men were.
Just like us.
Yeah, right. So
Sure.
as our bosses were telling us, you can't assume that these people read the comics. I mean, it's a very successful comic, but that means 2 million people out of 300 million are aware of who these characters are. So we have to write this as if we're explaining what a mutant is and explaining who the X-Men are,
Mhm.
and very carefully lay this out and introduce these characters to what we assume is an audience has no idea who they are and what they care about. So Mark and I laid that out the best we could, starting with Night of the Sentinels. And as we came to the end, we just thought, okay, we've got open with Night of the Sentinels, and you get a sense of normal people's anxieties over mutancy, and the Sentinels seem to be perfect embodiment of that. And then episode 13, we end up where the Sentinels are defeated. And in between there, we'll try to show as much as we can about each of the characters, because our number one job above all the others is for the audience to fall in love with the characters and get to know them. So we had Storm's claustrophobia, Magneto's agenda. We made sure to introduce the major X-Men people and get to know who they were and why they were there. And then the last bit on that first day at the dining room table was, and we want to pick somebody from the Marvel Universe to kill.
And I'm listening to this going, what? excuse me, this is a Saturday morning kid show, and I know this is a brave new world, but you and Mark Edens are both
Yeah.
students of
We just love heroic movies, heroic storytelling, old Greek myths, but westerns, war pictures, where heroic sacrifice was at the center of what we thought was going on with these comic books. Was the best part of these comic books. And so we said, okay, when we called the network, and for a couple of weeks we had to negotiate. They said, oh, you can't. Oh my God. No, we need to do it. It's like we have to show that there are consequences to being an X-Men, that this isn't play violence, that this is not the A-Team where they light up a cigar afterwards after they pretend shot at each other and slapped each other around a little bit, and then they have a big laugh. This needs to be serious. And so they finally agreed. And when we first wrote the script, it was a character named Thunderbird, who's a Native American character.
and that was consistent with the comic
Yes,
books.
yeah. We
Right.
went to Larry and to I'm sure to Marvel and say, okay, go through the history of the books and find half a dozen characters that have sacrificed themselves, that have died helping the X-Men. And so Thunderbird was one picked up right away, and there were a couple, three others. And so we wrote him in, and then somebody looked at it, I think from the network, and said, wait a minute, this is the only Native American character, and you're going to kill him in the first episode. So guys, can you find somebody else? So Larry suggested Changeling, who in the books was in maybe 3 or 4 issues, and he sacrificed himself to save Professor Xavier. He was a shapeshifter. Okay, cool. We changed the name and we changed the dialogue because now he's this goofy young guy. And then we get a note from the attorney saying, you can't use the name Changeling because DC has a character named Changeling. So wait a minute, Marvel predates it. Doesn't matter. I'm sure we'd win a lawsuit in the end, but we don't want to open this up. So they asked me to come up with a new name. So I renamed him Morph. And that's how Morph started. We needed to kill somebody, and we picked someone. We always wanted to try to pick someone from the books to fit our new original stories.
Right.
And to connect it for the fans of the books. And it happened that it was Changeling, gets killed, and that was how Morph started and ended. But
if you see the end of the opening sequence, when the two sides are charging at each other, there's a Native American on the bad guy side. That was because they'd already started designing Thunderbird.
Yeah.
And then it's like, oh, we can't use Thunderbird. Oh, well, we've already got the designs.
Yeah.
Oh, it'll be his twin brother Warpath. So
Yeah.
that's why he's included there.
We were working so fast
Oh
that
my
Larry
God.
didn't have time to redesign, we've already spent like a morning designing a character. Quick, throw him in the opening title. So that's why Warpath is in the opening titles, even though we never used him in the show. That's because he'd been designed to be Thunderbird.
Oh, I also want to make the point that the person who had the absolute final say over everything in the show through Fox Kids was the broadcast standards and practices person, a woman named Avery Coburn. And Eric, when you said, you and Mark, we need to prove heroic sacrifice matters and counts in this, and we need to kill a character. I didn't think you'd get clearance on that, but it was Avery Coburn who understood what you were doing.
Yeah, and she agreed, and she had certain rules that had to be off screen, couldn't be gratuitous. And we're focusing on the grief of the others, not on a big spectacular bloody death for the character.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that was very important for us for the first season. So to answer your original question, I read up on the characters as much as I could, as fast as I could. I didn't read 100 comic book issues because I didn't have time to. So it was never in my head to, oh, here's a cool issue, let's adapt it. We were just looking for stuff and characters that had happened within the X-Men universe to fit the stories we were coming up with for our 13. And so we were always thinking about original stories, but harking back. And while we're in the middle of doing that and getting to episode 13, someone called and said, well, what about Days of Future Past? And we looked at it and said, oh, this is really cool. We might be able to squeeze this in towards the end and have it fit with the other 11 stories we're telling. And we double checked with Marvel because obviously they care about it. And they said, cool, yeah, let's try that. And then Julia wrote half of it.
I wrote part one,
Guy named Bob Skier wrote the other half.
Marty Heisenberg.
And we had Bob and Marty. And
But they weren't, Marvel wasn't sure because the show, it was all so new, and so the placeholder name, we were calling it future tense, because we didn't know if we were going to get Marvel's blessing or not
to use
Days of Future Past. And it's like, okay, you can't use Kitty Pryde. Okay. And it's not going to be her brain going back in time. It's going to be someone physical. Her spirit going back.
This and amorphous say, well, that's kind of a decision on our part. It's just, well, A, since we're not using Kitty, there's going to be changes to start with, and B, I think for clarity, it's simpler to have a time traveler than it is to have a spirit traveler, and that just seemed like a bridge too far at the time to try to keep all this stuff clear. So Marvel was happy with, Marvel has been burned for about 30 years. They've been trying, hoping that somebody in Hollywood would understand and get their comics, and the stuff that was made out here was kind of juvenile and silly and didn't quite fit what they were hoping. So they were thrilled to get the fee. They were having financial trouble. They were thrilled to get the fee about getting the X-Men on TV, but when we were starting to develop it, I don't think they had great faith that we were going to get it right. That was that, and you can't blame them. They'd had a dozen chances in the past to try to get stuff right, and Hollywood would tend to not get it. So that was another part of this 7 or 8 months that we were waiting to watch the first episode to see if it worked right. People were not at all sure that what we were doing was the right thing to be doing.
Well, I mean, by the time it came out, I think you certainly, I don't know what kind of, again, because it was pre-internet days, what kind of immediate feedback you got, but I mean, certainly from, comic book fans like me, we were thrilled by it. I mean, it sort of fit seamlessly into what was going on in the comic book world at the time. I mean, this is going to be a question. You by virtue of the team that you had picked and the costuming, which harkens back to those Jim Lee, Chris Claremont issues, which were just blowing up at the time. I know, you had mentioned it was, only 2 million out of 300 million, but in the comic book world, it was, bonkers sales, nothing that you've ever seen since. So how, it's amazing that it took so much time, and yet you were still sort of part of the zeitgeist by the time it came out. Was there a decision around those? I know you said you had sort of kind of picked the 8, but in terms of the costumes and characters in concert, was there like thoughts of like, let's use what is right now currently taking off, or was there any thought to going back to other costumes and characters, or even putting together something new?
There was great thought among that. We at the writing side just didn't give it a second thought, but the people on the design side, having to paint it all, Will Mineo at the top, Will and Larry, and they had 2 excellent comic artists, Rick Hoberg, and my mind just went blank, Frank Brunner. So they had this nice staff of people that knew the comics backwards and forwards, knew the variations of them, knew the 20 different looks that they'd had, knew all these questions, and also had worked in animation for years. So that's the second question. Not only do you want to get good looking costumes and good looking looks for these characters, you want to get ones that animate the best, because animation is much more demanding. In a comic book, you can do incredible detail work and just really busy, complex design. But if you move that once, if someone turns to the left, you've just spent your entire animation budget on all that detail. So something that can be simplified and streamlined and animation friendly was also in the back of their minds. And so they agreed for 2 reasons. Jim Lee's, they thought, was the most animation friendly. It was 3 or 4 reasons. It was currently really popular. everything about it appealed to the artists, and the artists made producers made all those decisions. And if we'd had to deal with them in any sort of alternative look, it wouldn't have affected our storytelling at all. So that was the furthest thing from my mind, how they ended up looking, unless they looked odd or silly.
But a big war was happening that
Oh.
we found out about later.
We almost lost that look completely. I don't know if you've heard the story, but Will, who had been in charge of designing the team and with Larry doing so much of the drawing, they got a call like late on a Friday and that was rough because, there was, again, no internet and everything's closed for the weekend. We're in California, they're in New York, and a note from Marvel saying, after like 2 months of work on this, and the whole world's designed and the whole team's designed and the guest characters are designed. Oh, we got to throw that all out and redesign everybody. We're not staying with the Jim Lee look. It's gone out the window. Come up with something new. Oh, really? It's like we were a month behind as it was. We didn't have 10 minutes to redesign this thing, much less, a couple of weeks to rethink the whole world. And so we didn't know why, and they didn't tell us why. So Will, in his wisdom, very quickly drew up a cast, a pose with 7 or 8 of the X-Men characters. Looked really awful, like a Scooby-Doo meets X-Men babies, and sends that up. Okay, so you want a different look? You don't like the Jim Lee look? How about this? Because
with a straight face.
Yeah, and sent it into Marvel without any comment. Because he just desperately believed A, that Jim Lee look was right, and B, that there was no time to fix it, and so that it would ruin the schedule and it would ruin the look of the show. This was a terrible decision. Had no idea why Marvel had decided this, but they had. So it goes in there and everybody loses their mind. Stan sees it. Other people working on the show see it and they're calling Will late at night. What did you do? What did you do? And it just got the point across no, we're not going to change this. And we found out later.
We found out later it was because in that week, Jim Lee and some other artists had
left to form Image.
Form Image Comics.
And so
we didn't know that was happening.
So like almost any business would do, Marvel doesn't want to support their competitor. They're probably mad, so they said, get rid of this look, do a different thing for the TV show. And Will couldn't have just said, no, thank you. I think he had to make his point that no, if you really want to ruin the show over something this petty, here's what it could look like if you want me to. And he won the argument. By Monday afternoon, we were back with the Jim Lee look.
Wow. How close we were to disaster.
Yeah, truly.
I'd love to know from a, writing and, plotting point, who were your favorite characters to write for? Because you had made, these decisions about the core 8, and you obviously wanted to write to their strengths or their, dramatic impulses. As you were going, especially past maybe the first 13, who are the characters that you enjoyed most sort of concentrating on?
As one of the writers of the 20 or so you had that you worked with over the course of the series run, I think we all kind of felt we liked writing for Beast the most just because he's the smartest guy in the room, and we got to write like we were smart. But also as far as the characters go, of the X-Men team, he is the only one who can't walk down the street and not have people go, oh my God, that's a mutant over there. Do you see it? That's a mutant. And yet he was able to sort of carry that, but he was the one most affected by that kind of immediate, oh, you're weird looking, you are other in the X-Men world. And it was fun. You had come up with the idea when in the 2-part pilot, they're breaking into the facility to steal or to destroy the list, the
evil list, the computer list of mutants that they're rounding up and probably going to kill.
And you came up with the idea of a call to action for Beast, which became for the rest of us as writers became tremendous fun. It was,
Yeah, it in other shows we worked on, younger shows, there'd be, Cowabunga or whatever. Before you leap into action, somebody would, and it's literally referred to as a call to action in television writing. And so I thought, okay, well, let's give Beast some obscure poetry and to say, because he's the most well-read guy on the planet. And we just did it as a lark, and everybody liked it. And so everybody else tried to do it. We ended up with 20 or 20, like 20 of them over the course of, the series. And that just became a fun little Beast thing to
and
do.
again, this was all pre-internet. We had to use Bartlett's book of
Yeah,
quotations.
dusty quote books.
Yeah, quote books
You
to,
know,
to reverse engineer what a quote might be. But so that, and just saying you had the team of 8. There was care and consideration into what the different energies and powers were for each of them. You've often said,
yeah. So it's people always, yeah, how did you pick? And we looked, and there'd been 29 people in the first 25 years plus 5 years of reissues. 29 different people had been X-Men, and so how do you get it down to 7 or 8? And so we there was no agenda. None of us had favorites because we didn't know the book, so we did. I got to show this guy, and it's got to be Colossus. I can't do a show without Colossus. No, none of that. Marvel had interest in a couple people, like Gambit was new, and we all agreed we needed a younger character, and they'd failed with a pitch with Kitty Pryde a couple years earlier, one-off. And so they didn't want her. So, okay, we'll do Jubilee. She was a new character that they wanted to see. Everyone agreed on Professor X and Scott and Jean, just kind of as a core thing that went for 30 years. Okay, that's a given. But the rest of them they were wide open. Okay, we got 20 some others to pick from. And so from the writer standpoint, what we pushed for were having 7 or 8 people that were as different from each other as possibly could be, because that makes writing so much easier. It's a Storm line, it's a Jubilee line, it's a Gambit line, because they have such distinct personalities. The example we have is if it was Wolverine and Cable and Colossus and Thunderbird, and you could have like 6 big gruff guys just standing around barking at each other.
yeah,
Right.
And how do you write the scene? Which of the 6 gruff guys do you give the line to? So we were looking for that kind of distinction among them. So they're very different from each other.
Mhm.
And the animators were looking people that would animate easily. Flying is a lot cheaper than running.
Oh God.
So we wanted to get people that flew.
Mhm.
We wanted distinction among the powers. So it wasn't just like 7 people with eye blasts. So there was different kinds of powers. And by random chance, when we were done, we ended up with 4 men and 4 women. And so it was this gender balanced thing with and that was, later think, oh, you guys were such feminists. No, there was no agenda in that. But at the same time, you look back at it, when we were doing this, our genre was called boys action adventure.
Right.
And we got pressure on other shows
Oh,
to
yeah.
do, 6 Smurfs and a Smurfette, to do a bunch of guys and a token girl, because you got to throw in a token girl. And certainly in the toy business, there was a great boy preference. And so luckily that didn't come up. Our boss, the president that gave us a job, was a woman, and she believed that girls would watch X-Men if we put, I mean,
If you just played it straight with the character.
play it straight, no bending the rules, no, just, okay, the women are just as cool as the guys. So we're gonna get, and it proved her right. I mean, the reason the X-Men audience was so huge is that it was just as many girls as guys liked it. Older people, younger people, 4-year-olds were drawn to it because the colors were so pretty and it moved so fast. So it was this weird anomaly in Hollywood, never before or since, where all the demographics went for the show, young to old, ethnic diversity, anything you picked from, they all seem to like X-Men.
Yeah.
And that's just, it's what Stan and Jack handed us, was this setup of people that are different thrown together in this makeshift family. a found family that are struggling against people that have trouble with them. And
People who are different because that's just how they were born.
yeah,
They had no agency in the determination that if they have a mutation, that's going to present itself as they hit adolescence. And doesn't everyone go through that when he or she or they hit adolescence? You know, your body's doing weird stuff. What is going on? And you know, yeah, brilliant.
yeah.
Brilliant.
So all that credit. I mean, when you talk about, say, Chris Claremont, we probably pulled we pulled the tone and the focus of the show from the stuff from the 70s, from that era of comic, because it was much more about these people being adults and struggling with being mutants in a human world. Whereas the early stuff in the 60s was a little thinner, was a little more just, hey, here's a group of people that are going to fight another group of people. Let's see who wins.
Right.
So the themes were developed much more deeply in the Chris years, and the other people, you know,
Len Wein.
Len Wein, who was there at the building of the new team.
Mm-hmm.
That, you know, I mean, I'm sure your listeners know that there was an original team and that stopped in 1970, and then 1974, 75 they came back. And do you know the story about why it was an international team instead of like 6 American kids, which the original team was, like 6 wisecracking teens from America?
Right. You know, I can't produce it at this point. I probably have heard it a half a dozen times and I just can't get it. So why don't you repeat it for our listenership anyway?
Okay, sure. Len Wein told us the story, and he was there from the time he was 16 or 17, knocking on the doors of Marvel and wanting to be a comic book writer for the rest of his life, and he was a wonderful one. Well, he said what happened was during the time that the X-Men was in reissue, you know, it stops in the middle of 1970 for 5 years. They don't make new ones, they just reissue them. And there was evidently in 1974, an accountant went to the head director, I don't know who, could have been Roy Thomas. Anyway, someone there in the office had said, you know, I know we don't sell these new anymore, but there's a good demand for X-Men reprints internationally, overseas, Russia, Europe, Australia, South America, Africa. Why don't? And so we said, okay, when you make the new team, make it more of a United Nations of character. Come up with a bunch of new mutants who are all from different places, as opposed to a bunch of American teens.
Okay.
And so it was an accountant's understanding of reprint interest that set the stage for making it such a, you know, for Colossus and Nightcrawler and Storm and
Wolverine.
and Wolverine from Canada. He picked Wolverine as the first one. Okay, I'll make the first guy Canadian. And so that was Len was given this job to come up with new people that were international, and he started with a Canadian.
Who says marketing can't be inspirational? Right?
Well, one time you're going to hear that. Yeah.
Right, exactly. It strikes me from hearing a lot of these stories that, and I don't know how much there was any pressure at the time, but that you consciously chose to really evoke the feel and the stories of the comic books, and not where I think there would be probably a pull otherwise to say, okay, these are some interesting things, but I want to put my, imprint on it and change it a bunch so that everybody knows that I made it better for, animation. Was there a tension there, and you sort of stepped on the scale back towards like, let's be true to the comic books?
I think the comic books are so rich in themselves, and I think everyone on the team that jumped on the train as it's leaving the station, the idea that Will Mineo had always envisioned it as a series of episodes that would be told sequentially, that you could have 2 and 3 story arcs played out over time, because in the comic books you could have 40 different stories going that would play out, in each book. One would end, the next one would start, the other one you'd be halfway through, all the different threads. So just the style of telling the stories kept it in the camp of comic book style.
Yeah, yeah, I think there were 2 or 3 reasons why we were really stayed as close to the spirit of the books as we did. One of them was all the people on the art side and the people we were dealing with from Marvel who very much did not micromanage us. It's just like, they'd see our scripts, they'd give notes, and if we didn't like them, we didn't like them. I mean, it was a Fox show. Marvel did not have final say in anything, really.
How crazy is
How
that?
crazy is that to
Yeah,
think of it?
I know.
But we're as I say, Mark, when we're doing the show, Fox asked if Mark and I would like to run the show because we'd done so much work together over 15 years. And we looked over at Haim Saban, and he said, well, can you pay us each, the same salary? No, we got one salary to run this show. So, okay. So Mark said, fine, I'll just write 20 of them. Okay, cool. So, but he helped me lay out the first 26 episodes and all the major, like, 5-parters that came after it. So he had very much was involved in it. And we had the discussion. We had no ambition to tell new stuff because we're, I think the way he said it was, it's easier to just not worry about, to make the stories not connect with that world. It said it shows more care and commitment. And also, the people working with all on their art side love these characters. It's like if we were handed Star Trek, would we make Kirk an idiot? I mean, or would we make Spock a grinning, fool? If you love something and you got this fan base out there, why in the world, it was hard enough to come up with 13 stories and make them as fast as we could and make them as good as we could without thinking, well, how can we change these? How can we change this world and make it look more like something we do? I think our personalities are very much there within the world that if somebody else had run the show, it would have had a different slant. I think the one major creative decision we made, that it could have been a very different show and still worked with the books and still honored the books, is when Mark and I looked at the books, we saw 2 real strong impulses. One was the standard comic impulse of, here's a powerful guy, who's going to win, or here's a powerful group, who's probably going to, who's going to win. It's kind of like the professional wrestling drama of, oh my God, is his power going to beat his power? And every fan in the world always asks those questions. That was interesting, kind of the way, shootouts are in Westerns. But the Westerns that Mark and I liked were all about the characters. And the characters seemed to come out more in the books that were all about, what is it like to be a mutant? So we consciously tried to think up stories that were focused on our or 7 or 8 characters, or their best friend, or their father, or their beloved from a previous girlfriend. Or focus on the characters and focus on them struggling daily to deal with what it's like to be a mutant. That side of the stories fascinated us. So if it's anything, obviously we're going to have big fights in the show, but that was secondary. If anything needed to give, the spectacle would give, and we would downplay that and spend more time with the characters. I mean, some of them, like the one with Nightcrawler. I mean, it's basically Nightcrawler and Wolverine debating faith. I mean, that's not a big action picture. There's something burning down in the background. But that's not what, the episode's about the 2 of them touching each other's heart. I mean, so.
And again, the way it worked out, you were given 13 episodes for what became the first season. No promise that you were coming back. So you and Mark are really, throwing everything into it, because these were probably going to be the only 13 episodes produced about these characters. Then when you were tapped to come back for season 2, you were also given only 13 episodes. So in that span of time, it was, well, what would happen if Dad goes away, you know, which was Xavier and Magneto in the Savage Lands. And then that gave a great opportunity to focus on each of the characters individually, having, you know, his or her own personal journey, personal struggles. Then when you came back for season 3, that's when they gave you a bigger order.
Yeah,
So if you look at it, you could say, oh, that was 5 seasons. Well, it was, but it wasn't, it didn't start as 5
it
seasons.
was 1, 2, and then the rest.
Yeah.
Right.
But
Which also infused how you chose to tell stories, I think.
yeah, but it's weird. It's like, you know, Mark and I both, you know, we were passionate fans the way comic book fans and TV fans, music fans are of the show, things that meant something to us, like the original Star Trek. Um, and the idea that we were being entrusted with a legacy from this very, very popular, influential world, and that we would somehow, you know, it was such a gift to be able to tell adult heroic stories in the first place, that the last thing we were thinking about, oh yeah, how can we change it around and make people see this completely differently and know that we did it? You know, the ego wasn't even there. We were just, how do we get 13 stories approved by all these different people and have them all agree that it feels like an X-Men episode? Because Marvel would have to kind of sign off on it, and Fox would have to sign off on it, and our production people would have to say, oh, we can make that for the budget, as opposed to we have to cut that back by 3/4 and not go to, you know, outer space, and not go here because we don't have the budget for it. So make it just the practical side of it, I think, preempted us from kicking back and thinking, what else could we do with these characters that they haven't even thought of yet?
Now, the flip side, you had some folks on the writing and on the art side who were huge fans.
Yeah.
So every episode, it wasn't so much, well, let me put my personal stamp on it. It was, let me bring in 13 obscure characters that aren't even on this team because I want to tell that story. No, no, simmer down, simmer down. You know,
We had to contain it's hard to tell. We only had 21, 22 minutes to tell a story each week. And we have all these characters to service. You got 8 main characters and villains and guest stars and relationship. You know, there's not 10 seconds to spend with each one. If you jam it full of stuff, and there were occasional writers that were such big fans that they did have an agenda. And I'd get a story premise, a 1-page story premise, it would indicate there'd be 37 different mutants to deal with, you know, or favorite characters from the X-Men universe to deal with in that 121-minute story. I think, guys, you know, we got to think of the story first, and we can't just pare it down and pare it down and pare it down. And we got into trouble when there were oh, here's 6 new ones, and here's 6, you know, people love seeing the characters that they've read on screen. Oh boy, it's X Factor. Oh boy, you know, this massive group of people, all of whom we have to introduce, give them some lines of dialogue, use their superpower. And by the end of it, you've got this tiny little story that has nowhere to breathe because you've used up all your time introducing the 24 characters that there's no time to service. So I think some of the best shows were we would break off 2 or 3 X-Men and spend most of the time with them. Like, again, the Nightcrawler episode, that's like 3 X-Men. It's
Rogue, Gambit, and Wolverine over there in the Alps.
Yeah.
In the Alps.
With
on their ski vacation for some reason.
Yeah.
Why not?
Yeah, why not? So yeah, I think that was that's a continual struggle. You know, we want to put everybody in it, but we want to tell a real clear story and give each character 5 minutes of screen time to show who they are. And it was always a struggle.
Right. Well, was it always a struggle internally, or did you ever get pushback from the studio, from Marvel, saying, I mean, it shouldn't be from Marvel because they're very character driven themselves, but that, you know, there needs to be more action, or we have to introduce such and such because they're blowing up in the comics and we want to get toy sales up, or anything like that?
We were so lucky because we worked on other shows. We get the kind of pressure like product placement or toy placement, or never once I think, you know, there were just suggestions like we'd like to see Cable in the first 13. That was like as hard as they push. Um, and as far as the toys went, we were so lucky. X they hadn't planned for it to be successful, so there wasn't really a merchandise in place
Right.
when we got started. And so I think somebody bought into Marvel when we were about 9 scripts into the 13, and Avi Arad called on the phone and said, "Hey, we don't have much in the way of merchandise in the show, but can you put some of it in?" And I said, "Avi, what you've got is like Wolverine curtains, a Wolverine telephone with his head on it, and a couple other things."
Wolverine walkie-talkie.
Wolverine, yeah.
I remember those.
Okay. Have you read our stories? Would our Wolverine go around, you know, have curtains with fun little things, or pajamas with the other X-Men on it? No, he wouldn't. We can't do this. They said, well, how about the okay, Blackbird, cool. They had a Blackbird model. We'll show it, you know, if we were going to show it for 3 seconds in an episode, we'll show it for 9. Okay, we'll give you a little more Blackbird time. Well, that's not necessary to the show, but we'll give you a little more plain spectacle. How's that? But he didn't have any leverage. We've worked on other shows where the toy company or whoever was paying for everything. And if they wanted 13 new vehicles in the episode, you put 13 new vehicles, each with a personality, into the episode. And that just did not happen with us at all. And by the time our show was a super hit, you know, couple months later, after Toy Biz had come in, they were making so much money hand over fist with their merchandise. They didn't feel like they needed to try to be pushy or try to change the contract or whatever. But that was something that, again, was Margaret's decision. She said, this is not going to be toy based. This is going to be character based. We're not going to let outside people, we're not going to let advertisers dictate us to what the shows are going to be like. You know, it's going to be our creative decisions this time. None of these secondary people are going to dictate to us what our show is, because it happened to her all the time over 20 years, you know, these secondary folks. And you just want to take, you know, you want to take the people, the business people, because I have great respect for them. I have great respect for their money. They're involved in the show, and just say the best way for you to make the most money is for us to make the best show. And if we can make a huge fan base for you, it doesn't matter if we don't see, you know, your t-shirt or your skateboard or whatever it is you wanted to show. This is not a commercial. If you get hundreds of millions of people liking these characters, you will sell product. Just leave us alone, please.
Right. I mean, that makes a whole lot of sense. And I'd imagine there's a lot of those conversations that end up with the writers and producers being on the losing end and saying, you know, leave me alone. Well, no, we can't leave you alone. We're going to be overbearing. But I mean, how amazing an experience for you guys, and how much it benefited the show to have that kind of approach and setup and you know, sort of insulation from those pressures.
Yeah, we were so well protected.
There were so many, I think you figured out strategically, there were 6 times specifically, and who knows how many more, when the show could have gone off the rails, like with, no, we can't use Jim Lee art. What do you mean? Those kinds of moments. And the people who were in the right place to say, no, I drew the line in the sand. I am not going over that. And lightning in a bottle, Larry Houston, you use that phrase too.
Yeah.
About everybody was in the right person in the right place at the right time, from Margaret Lesh on down.
Yeah, we're here praising the executives and the censors that we worked under. This is what a gift they were, and how we never would have this opportunity again, because it was so cool to work for them.
Yeah. I mean, it's certainly amazing. And I don't think I've ever heard that kind of praise for corporate overlords, as they were. So yeah, I mean, the proof is in the pudding. I mean, what, you know, the show that came out was certainly, you know, not pandering, and you didn't see any of the fingerprints of, you know, corporate or business interests on it. And so it's in a very cool way, very pure. Which kind of brings me to, this revival, which is happening right now. And first of all, I'd love to know what, if any, part you've played in getting that back out there, but also, can you believe, decades later that this is happening?
Yeah.
Boy, you'd asked earlier about when did we kind of know, because there was no internet, that X-Men, the animated series, was successful. And this is back in the days of the Nielsen ratings that would come out, multiple times a week and a month. And we were faxed the Nielsen ratings through Fox Kids, and were made quickly aware of the fact that the show was a huge hit. What was that?
There were some weekends that it got as much as ABC, CBS, and NBC put together.
It was just, it shot out of the gate, and it never slowed down. But again, that was us learning about it through the Nielsen ratings, the occasional newspaper article.
But
And
now it's 30 years later.
Yeah, so there was no, I keep saying this, there was no box set release of the DVDs or a Blu-ray. It was because of rights issues. It stopped being shown on various network channels and streaming services. So for a while there, we were literally out in the wilderness going, anybody remember X-Men?
Yeah.
Anyone remember that? And I'll tell you why. It's because Batman, the animated series, deservedly was getting big blowout parties for, I think it's 20th anniversary or some big Batman
They had a
anniversary.
continuation with with the 90-minute animated, like TV movies and things.
Right.
And Warner's had this continuing interest
Mhm.
in reinventing it, because we're friends with the folks that worked over there. We know how it just continued to live, and we just shrugged. Well, X-Men was kind of the poor relation, was a little garage band that was thrown together, and it came apart. So there's nobody to really shepherd it past the 5 years it showed. And okay, it played on repeat, it played overseas, I'm sure. That was cool. It was a great experience, but okay, it's gone. And Julia nudged me in 2015 and said, look, we've got all the scripts and all the storyboards and all the
notes
demos and everything
above our garage.
Someone needs to write a book about this. And we called up at the time to Marvel, and they didn't have all the rights, and so they weren't even interested in taking our phone call. Fine. So we wrote a book on our own, previously on X-Men, where we interviewed everybody that worked on the show, just as a way to kind of put it down in print. Okay, this was our coolest job ever. Here are the people. This is how wonderful it was. This is how strange it was. And so we're doing this. We haven't been to a Comic-Con in 20 years.
Yeah, we're not artists. We're
yeah.
not voice talent. We can't draw you anything. We
And
can't.
weren't aware that, if any interest anymore. Well, we started taking the book in 2017 to Comic-Cons and looked around, and there were all these people like dressed from the show.
Yes.
There were all the cosplayers and everything, and all these people showing interest and coming, running up to our table and saying how much it meant to them and it changed their life and how special it was. And okay, cool. This is really nothing but gratitude and love coming our way. So this is wonderful to hear. But it's still okay. This is where it's going to go. We'll meet some people, and they enjoyed it as kids, like we enjoyed the original Star Trek as kids. We get it. We were fans too. And then we get a call.
No, you got an email.
I got an email
of the vice president in charge of global licensing
from Marvel in 2017.
And I thought the anvil's dropping on us.
Yeah. Okay. They found out that we published this book on our fair use with a small publisher. And they want to and they said, no, we all saw it, we all read it, we loved it, but the rights are coming back together. And we want to do a big art book. You guys couldn't use the art book, no color picture. We want to do a big art book about the show. We'd love for you guys to do it. So, okay, suddenly there's this interest and excitement. And then we start talking to them, and we realize that the Disney Plus is coming online, and they say, somebody sent us,
I've got it somewhere.
A wonderful graph, and they said, do you guys realize how many fans there are out there for X-Men the animated series? I said, no, we don't. Okay, here is a list of 1 through 100 of the properties that the fans are most excited about
that are coming to Disney Plus,
which include all the Pixar movies, all the Star Wars movies, and TV shows and animated shows, all the Disney ones, all the Marvel movies, all the Marvel, television shows. So hundreds and hundreds of things that were going to be on Disney Plus. And all the way to the top, and number one by about a 20% margin was X-Men the Animated Series. Of all the fans that they interviewed online and social media, it was the one everybody was most dying to see on the new network. And we said, "You're kidding." It was like, this is, the genre. Okay, we
Yeah.
know there are people that are still coming to Comic Cons that still love it, but you really, really, out of the entire world of stuff that Disney has in its hands, this is the thing they want to see most. And they said, "Yeah."
So then with the production of X-Men, the Art and Making of the Animated Series book, we got to meet just huge fans at Marvel, at Disney, from the original series. And so, well, that's really nice. That's really nice. This is so cool. And then shortly after the book came out, because the book came out in October 2020, right at the middle of
The
COVID.
heart of the worst part of COVID.
We couldn't go to any cons, we couldn't go celebrate, but later in the year 2021, we did get contacted by Marvel Disney saying, super secret, hush, hush, code names, but we have a project. Would you be
that we're heavily into and we're committed to? Would you guys like to help us out? And with, okay, what's the deal? And so just so the quantity of work we did on the show, on the new show, X-Men 97, is tiny. These people, Bodemayo, who's the showrunner, and the wonderful executives that supervised him on the show, they had put together a huge crew of about 100 people.
Oh my God.
And they've been cranking on this thing for about a year. By the time we get the phone call saying, "Well, we've got got a bunch of scripts together. Everybody working on this crew is a huge fan of your show. We'd like you to come on and be consulting producers. And what all that means for you is that whenever we finish something, we'd like you to be the first audience and give us your impressions."
Okay.
What a gig!
Not a
And-
bad gig. Yeah.
And with
Exactly.
Larry Houston,
And
so the
Houston
three
got
of us are,
same gig.
yeah. And I've caught a couple things, I'm not going to say what they were, but going, oh, that was like this
Yeah.
in the old show, and oh, we'll flip it, that kind of
You
stuff.
don't want to be the curmudgeon that, in my day, this is
Yeah.
we told a story.
Right.
We didn't want to do that at all.
No.
We didn't want to push that, but we felt very gratified that they involved us.
Yes.
Because we're out here in Hollywood, 99 out of 100 times, the new people don't even want to take the phone call from the old people.
Yeah.
They say, "Okay, this is our chance to do a Star Trek or a James Bond or whatever it is that there is a history of, and they're doing a new version. What, you bring the old guys on to tell you you're doing it wrong?" So they were so cool to do this for us.
Yes.
And we felt we contributed a little bit, and that we got to enjoy all the excitement of the fact that it worked, because most of the time these things don't work. Almost every time you see you bring back something 25 years later, it's just, oh my God, are they just doing this for the money? And this is so wrong. The tone's wrong, the look's wrong, the people are wrong. Why did they ruin this for me by trying again? Why didn't they just leave me with the memories of the old one? That's 9 out of 10 times is what happens out here in Hollywood. But this time, man, they got it right. We feel, I don't know about you.
I was about to say the exact same thing. I'm glad you guys feel that way because you are the experts. But to me, I am instantly transported back to the day. It's a seamless continuation. I mean, down to not only the dialogue and sort of the plotting, but just the animation style. I mean, to take it, to really constrain yourself to not over animate and make it like, today's animation, and to really fit in with the sort of even the quirks that had to go on with the animation in the original series is I think an amazing it's an amazing feat to make it not look as good as it could look in a way.
But in the doing of that, it feels so authentic. It feels
Yes.
so real. It
Yes.
feels like season 6. And
Yes.
it's like, wait, that was in 1996 when that wrapped up. So X-Men 97. It's
Yeah.
the next season. They're picking up right where
Yeah.
the series
I
left
think May
off.
97 was the last,
Oh, the
was
last
episode, the last episode was premiered for the first time. So this is
Yeah.
very much picking up like next month.
So it's profoundly gratifying, and it's good night. Waking up Wednesday morning, we're out here in Los Angeles, Pacific time. Waking up Wednesday morning after it's been released at 12:01 Wednesday morning AM. People are losing their minds. And I would like to point out that those of us right now in this time frame between when the show first debuted on March 20th to when it's going to wrap up with the last episode, we are the only people in the world who've had this once a week release of a show that we can all enjoy together, and then wait a week for the next episode. The next bunch of folks can binge it all they want after it's all been released. But right now, the interaction among fans online, the
It's like the old days.
Oh my God, the anticipation.
It's like Monday on the schoolyard.
it's-
What did the
Yeah.
X-Men do on Saturday?
how are they gonna get out of this? It's thrilling. It's absolutely thrilling.
Yes, I like the word you use, gratifying, because it just must sort of almost justify. I mean, you had all the success back in the day. It's not like it was necessarily an undiscovered gem. So you did have that success, but
Yes.
the fact that they chose to revive it and literally continue it, just use the template and the approach that you used and just continue that whole trajectory, again, must be immensely gratifying, and just justify the way you produced the original show. And you're right, it is one of those shows, and there's so few nowadays that become appointment viewing, right? We can now stream almost everything at any point at any time, but at least for these series that they release in a weekly format, we have that, that old sort of appointment kind of TV, and that sort of communal viewing that we just don't get as much anymore. And it's been, for fans, I think just really reinforcing sort of our fandom, and the ability to kind of reconnect with the characters and the stories, and do so on a weekly sequential basis. So thank you for laying the groundwork for the show, and whatever, even if you say it's a minimal amount of work on the new show, it certainly, the legacy of what you did sort of carries through.
Thank you for that. Thank you.
Hey everybody, welcome back. It was a great pleasure to talk to these two about X-Men, the animated series, a series I loved as a kid, and am really enjoying the revival / continuation that is X-Men 97. I was particularly interested in hearing about how they came up with the storylines, how they came up with the cast of characters, what they put into thinking about long term in terms of plot lines. And it really was sort of a comic book-esque process. And it was great to hear that they had so much thought, even though they weren't, originally comic book fans. So thank you, Julia and Erica Lewald, for being on the show. Thank you, all of you out there, for listening, for viewing, for subscribing, for rating, reviewing, all that stuff that gets us more attention and gets you more guests, as we do coming up in the weeks ahead. So we will sign off for now, and we'll see you next issue.